The sound of metal scraping against metal echoed through the mountain silence as Marcus stared at the steel gate, blocking his family's century-old trail. Behind him, his father's ashes sat in a wooden box, waiting for their final journey to the summit where 3 generations of his family were buried. The woman who'd locked him out stood on her porch, arms crossed, watching him with cold satisfaction. But she had no idea that her petty act of spite would cost her everything she'd worked for. Because sometimes, when you wage war against the wrong person, they don't just fight back, they buy the very ground you stand on. Marcus Chen pulled his truck to a stop at the base of White Rock Trail, the same dirt path his grandfather had carved with his own hands in 1952. But instead, his chest tightened as he stared. At the sight before him, a brand new steel gate stretched across the trail, secured with a heavy padlock that gleamed in the morning sun. Posted on either side were fresh signs. Private property, nitrogen monoxide trespassing violators will be prosecuted. This can't be right, Marcus muttered, stepping out of the truck. The wooden box containing his father's ashes sat on the passenger seat, wrapped in his dad's favorite flannel shirt. They were supposed to make this journey together one last hike to the family burial. Ground at the summit where his grandfather and great-grandfather rested under the ancient pines, the sound of a screen door slamming made him look up. A woman emerged from the log cabin that sat about 50 yards from the trailhead, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. She wore designer hiking gear that looked like it had never seen actual dirt, and her expression was as cold as the morning air. "Can I help you?" she called out, though her tone suggested she had no intention of helping anyone. Marcus approached the fence, his work boots crunching on the gravel. "I'm Marcus Chen. This is my family's trail. We've been using it for 70 years. The woman's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Not anymore. I'm Victoria Hartwell, and I own this property now. That includes the trail." She gestured toward the gate with manicured fingers. "Private property means private property." "Ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding." Marcus kept his voice steady, though his hands were beginning to shake. "This trail has been in my family since my grandfather built it. We have an easement. Show me the paperwork." Victoria crossed her arms, her designer jacket rustling with the movement. Marcus felt his stomach drop. His father had always handled the legal aspects of the property, and after the sudden heart attack 3 weeks ago, Marcus had been too consumed with grief to dig through decades of family documents. I don't have it with me, but I can get it. Then you can come back when you do." Victoria's smile was predatory. "Until then, this gate stays locked. Please." The word came out rougher than Marcus intended. "My father just died. His ashes are in my truck. I need to take him to the family burial ground." For a moment, something flickered in Victoria's eye, surprise, maybe even a hint of sympathy, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "I'm sorry for your loss, but that doesn't change property law. Find another route." "There is no other route." Marcus's voice cracked with desperation. "The burial ground is on the north face of the mountain. This trail is the only way up there that doesn't require climbing equipment." Victoria shrugged, already turning back toward her cabin. "Not my problem." "Wait," Marcus called after her. "How much?" She paused, looking over her shoulder. "Excuse me, how much to let me through?" "Just this once. Name your price." Victoria's eyes narrowed as she studied him. Marcus could see her calculating, weighing options. $5,000. The number hit him like a physical blow. $5,000 he didn't have, couldn't even begin to scrape together. His father's medical bills had drained their savings, and the small construction business Marcus ran was barely keeping them afloat. "I don't have that kind of money." "Then I guess you'll have to figure something else out." Victoria's voice dripped with fake sympathy. "Maybe try the county cemetery. I hear they have nice plots." The casual cruelty of her words ignited something white-hot in Marcus's chest. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious." She laughed at her own joke. "This is prime real estate, Mr. Chen. Mountain access doesn't come cheap anymore. I paid good money for this property, and I'm not running a charity." Marcus stared at her, really seeing her for the first time. The cabin behind her wasn't a humble mountain retreat, it was a $1 million vacation. Home with floor-to-ceiling windows and a wraparound deck that probably cost more than most people's houses. The BMW X5 parked beside it still had temporary plates. "You're not even from here," he said, the realization hitting him. "I'm from wherever I choose to be." Victoria's tone turned defensive. "I have just as much right to be here as anyone else. This isn't about rights. This is about respect. About understanding what this place means to the people who've been here for generations. Oh, spare me the sob story about tradition and family legacy." Victoria waved her hand dismissively. "This is business, pure and simple. You want access to my property, you pay for it." Marcus felt the familiar weight of his father's voice in his memory. Sometimes the right thing and the easy thing are two different paths, but you always know which one you're supposed to take. "I'll find the easement documents," Marcus said quietly, "and when I do, I'll be back. You do that." Victoria was already walking away, but until then, this gate stays locked. Marcus stood there for a long moment, staring at the steel barrier that separated him from his family's history. The mountain loomed beyond it, its peak shrouded in morning mist. Somewhere up there, his grandfather and great-grandfather waited in there. Simple graves, marked only by rough stone cairns and the passage of time. He walked back to his truck, his hands trembling as he touched the wooden box containing his father's ashes. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered. "I'm going to fix this, I promise." As he drove away, Marcus caught sight of Victoria in his rearview mirror. She stood on her deck, watching him leave with obvious satisfaction. She had no idea that her moment of petty victory would be the catalyst for her own downfall. That evening, Marcus sat in his father's study, surrounded by boxers of old documents and legal papers. The room still smelled like his dad's pipe tobacco and the musty scent of old books. After hours of searching, he found what he was looking for: a manila folder labeled White Rock Trail Easement, -1952. Inside were the original documents, signed by his grandfather and the previous landowner, establishing a permanent right-of-way. For the Chen family and their descendants, the easement had been recorded with the county, filed in triplicate, and notarized by the town clerk. Marcus's hands shook as he read the final clause. "This easement shall run with the land in perpetuity, binding all future owners and their heirs." Victoria Hartwell had made a very expensive mistake. But as Marcus prepared to make copies of the documents, another paper caught his eye. It was a tax assessment notice dated just 2 months ago. The property Victoria had purchased, the cabin, the land. The trail was larger than she probably realized. According to the county records, her parcel extended beyond the trailhead. Wrapping around the base of the mountain, Marcus studied the property map, his construction contractor's eye automatically assessing the lay of the land. Victoria's driveway was long and winding, cutting through what looked like a separate parcel before reaching the main road. He traced the property lines with his finger, checking and rechecking the coordinates. A slow smile spread across his face as the pieces fell into place. Victoria Hartwell's driveway, her only means of accessing her $1 million cabin, crossed through a small strip of land that wasn't part of her property. According to the county records, that strip was owned by a holding company called Mountain Vista LLC, which had been trying to sell it for years. Marcus reached for his phone and dialed the number listed on the tax assessment. It rang 3 times before a tired voice answered. "Mountain Vista Holdings, this is Jerry." "Hi, Jerry. I'm calling about the property you have listed on White Rock Mountain, the narrow strip along the old logging road." "You mean the headache parcel?" Jerry sighed. "Yeah, it's still available. Been trying to unload it for 5 years. No one wants a skinny piece of land that's mostly rocks and trees. What are you asking for it?" "At this point, make me an offer. I just want it off my books." Marcus looked at his father's ashes, sitting on the desk beside the easement documents. He thought about Victoria's cold smile, her casual cruelty, her $5,000 ransom demand. "I'll take it," he said. "When can we close?" 3 days later, Marcus stood at the base of White Rock Trail, a manila envelope in one hand and a no trespassing sign in the other. The steel gate still blocked. The trail, its padlock gleaming in the afternoon sun. He'd made 2 stops before coming here. The first was at the county courthouse, where he'd filed the easement documents and received official confirmation that the Chen family had legal right-of-way across the property. The second was at Mountain Vista Holdings, where he'd signed the papers making him the owner of a narrow strip of land that happened to be the only way to reach Victoria Hartwell's cabin. The sound of the BMW's engine announced Victoria's arrival before Victoria Hartwell sat in her BMW for 20 minutes, staring at the no trespassing sign that now blocked her own driveway. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd used the same tactic to keep Marcus from reaching his family's burial ground, and now he'd turned her weapon against her. Finally, she stepped out of the car, her designer heels clicking against the asphalt. "This is ridiculous." Marcus leaned against his truck. Arms crossed. "Sure I can. It's called property rights. You taught me that. I'll sue you." Victoria's voice carried the sharp edge of someone accustomed to getting her way through threats and money. "I'll have my lawyers go ahead." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. "I've already talked to mine. Turns out you never had legal right-of-way across this land. The previous owner of your cabin just used it without permission for years, and nobody cared enough to stop him. But I care." Victoria's hands shook as she scrolled through her own phone, probably searching for her attorney's number. "This is harassment. I'm calling the police. You do that." Marcus's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "While you're at it, ask them about the illegal gate you put across a public easement. I filed a complaint this morning." The sound of gravel crunching announced the arrival of a sheriff's deputy. Marcus recognized him. Deputy Rodriguez had grown up in town, probably knew the Chen family history. Victoria clearly thought his arrival was her salvation. "Officer, thank God you're here." Victoria hurried toward the patrol car, her relief evident. "This man is trying to extort me. He's blocking access to my property." Deputy Rodriguez stepped out of his vehicle, his expression neutral but his eyes taking in the scene. "Ma'am, I'm actually here about a complaint regarding an illegal gate. Are you Victoria Hartwell?" Victoria's face went pale. Yes, but you've blocked a legal easement, Ms. Hartwell. I need you to remove the gate immediately, or we'll have to do it for you. But that's my property." "The trail crosses your property, but the Chen family has legal right-of-way, has since 1952. Rodriguez pulled out a clipboard. "I've got the court order right here. Gate comes down today." Marcus watched Victoria's world crumble in real time. She'd thought money and attitude could override decades of legal precedent. "This is insane," Victoria muttered, but she was already walking toward the gate, pulling out her phone to call someone, probably a locksmith. An hour later, the steel gate lay in pieces beside the trail. Marcus had watched in silence as Victoria supervised its removal, her jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. Now she stood beside the twisted metal, looking like a general whose army had just surrendered. "There," she said, her voice brittle. "Your precious trail is open. Are you satisfied?" Marcus looked at the wooden box containing his father's ashes, then back at Victoria. "It means you still haven't learned anything." Marcus walked to his truck and retrieved a folding chair and a thermos of coffee. "You think this was about the trail? This was about respect, about understanding that some things are more important than money. So what now?" Victoria's voice cracked with exhaustion. "You're going to keep me prisoner in my own home." "Going to sit right here," Marcus said, setting up his chair beside the no trespassing sign, "and think about what my father would want me to do." The next morning, Victoria emerged from her cabin looking like she hadn't slept. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her hair uncombed. She'd clearly spent the night making phone calls, trying to find a way out of her predicament. Marcus was still there, sitting in his chair with a fresh cup of coffee and a newspaper. Wooden box sat on his truck's dashboard, catching the morning light. "This is kidnapping," Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. "This is property ownership," Marcus replied without looking up from his paper. "Same thing you explained to me yesterday." A man in an expensive suit stepped out. He had the look of someone who billed by the hour and charged accordingly. "Ms. Hartwell, I'm David Kellerman from Morrison & Associates." The lawyer's voice was smooth and professional. "We spoke on the phone, thank God." Victoria practically ran to him. "Tell him he can't do this." Kellerman studied the situation for a moment, then walked over to Marcus. "Sir, I understand you're the new owner of this property." "That's right." Marcus folded his newspaper and stood. "You're welcome to check the deed. Filed yesterday, all legal and proper." "I'm sure it is." Kellerman's smile was practiced and cold, but blocking access to someone's home could be considered criminal harassment. Marcus pulled out his own phone and showed Kellerman a photo. "This is what your client put across my family's trail. She demanded $5,000 to let me take my father's ashes to our family burial ground. Kellerman's professional composure flickered. See, do you? Because she didn't just block a trail, counselor. She held my father's funeral hostage for money. So when you talk to me about harassment, you might want to consider what a jury would think about that. The lawyer looked between Marcus and Victoria, clearly reassessing the situation. No accommodations. Marcus's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. Your client had a chance to be reasonable. She chose extortion instead. This is ridiculous. I offered to let you use the trail for $5,000. It's my property, and this is mine. Marcus gestured to the strip of land beneath her feet. You want to use my property? Make me an offer. Victoria's eyes narrowed as she realized where this was going. How much Marcus pretended to consider. It, looking up at the mountain peak where his ancestors waited, well, you set the precedent. $5,000. $5,000. To drive across a strip of dirt per trip, Marcus added. Same terms you offered me. Cash up front, no guarantees about future access. Extortionist a dime. Then I guess you'll be walking. Marcus sat back down in his chair. Better get comfortable. It's going to be a long siege. Word spread through the small mountain town like wildfire. The Chen family had been part of the community for 3 generations. Marcus's grandfather had helped build half the houses in town, and his father had wired the electrical systems in most of them. Victoria Hartwell was a stranger who'd swooped in with city money and city attitude, trying to buy her way to the top of the social ladder. By noon, a small crowd had gathered at the base of the mountain. Old-timers who remembered his grandfather brought folding chairs and coolers full of beer. A few local kids set up a lemonade stand, sensing an opportunity. Victoria watched from her deck as the impromptu block party grew larger. Few people even brought free Marcus signs, though he wasn't actually imprisoned, just choosing to stay put. This is turning into a circus, Kellerman muttered. Good, Marcus called out, overhearing. Maybe your client will learn something about community. Around 3 in the afternoon, a news van pulled up. Channel 7 from the city had gotten wind of the story wealthy outsider versus local family, property rights versus human decency. It was the kind of David and Goliath story that played well on the evening news. Smile approached Marcus first. Sir, I'm Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. Can you tell us what's happening here? Marcus looked at the wooden box in his truck, then at the growing crowd of supporters. Kind of community we want to be. Do we stand by our neighbors when they're grieving, or do we hold their pain hostage for money? The camera panned to Victoria, who had retreated inside her cabin but was clearly visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She looked trapped, like an animal in a zoo cage. Ma'am, the reporter called out, would you like to comment? Victoria's response was to close her curtains. That evening, the story led the local news. The headline read, Mountain Standoff. Wealthy homeowner blocks access to family burial ground to profit from a father's funeral, while Marcus came across as a grieving son fighting for his family's honor. The story went viral overnight. By morning, Victoria's phone was ringing. Constantly reporters, bloggers, social media influencers, all wanting to know why she demanded money from a grieving son. Her carefully curated social media accounts were flooded with angry comments. Someone had even started a GoFundMe to help Marcus pay for legal fees, though he hadn't asked for it. Victoria emerged from her cabin looking haggard and defeated. The siege was entering its 3rd day, and the pressure was clearly getting to her. Marcus was still there, still sitting in his chair, still blocking her only way out. Please, she said, her voice barely above a why. 6 months later, Marcus stood at his father's grave on the mountain summit, watching the sunrise paint the valley below in shades of gold and amber. The simple stone cairn he'd built marked the spot where his father's ashes had finally found their rest alongside the weathered markers of his grandfather and great-grandfather. The hike up had become a weekly ritual, part meditation, part pilgrimage. Each trip reminded him of the weight of legacy, the responsibility that came with carrying forward a family's story. Today felt different, though. Today brought news that would close the final chapter of his conflict with Victoria Hartwell. His phone buzzed with a text from Jerry at Mountain Vista Holdings. Thought you'd want to know. Hartwell property going into foreclosure, banks seizing it next week. Marcus stared at the message, feeling no satisfaction in Victoria's downfall. What had started as a quest for justice had become something else entirely. A harsh lesson in how quickly pride and greed could destroy a life. The trail down seemed shorter than usual, his feet finding the familiar rhythm his family had walked for generations. When he reached the bottom, he wasn't surprised to see Victoria's BMW parked near the trailhead. She sat on the tailgate, looking small and defeated in clothes that had seen better days. "I wondered when you'd show up," Marcus said, approaching. Cautiously, the polished veneer was gone, replaced by hollow cheeks and dark circles under her eyes. "I heard you come down here every week. Thought maybe ... maybe we should talk about what? About how you destroyed my life." The words came out flat, emotionless, like she'd practiced them. Marcus felt a flicker of anger. "I destroyed your life. You're the one who demanded ransom money from a grieving son, and you're the one who turned it into a media circus." Victoria's voice gained strength, fed by months of resentment. "Do you have any idea what the last 6 months have been like for me? Enlighten me." Victoria laughed bitterly. The video went everywhere. TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. "Rich woman tries to extort dead man's son." That was the headline that stuck. Someone made memes out of my face. My friends stopped calling. My business partners dropped me. Even my family won't return my calls. Marcus studied her, seeing past the anger to the pain underneath. "I never asked for any of that. You didn't have to. You knew exactly what would happen when you called that reporter." "I didn't call any reporter. They found the story on their own." "Right?" Victoria's sarcasm was sharp enough to cut. Poor innocent Marcus, just trying to bury his daddy. "Never occurred to you that live streaming your little revenge fantasy would ruin someone's life. You ruined your own life the moment you put a price tag on human decency." Victoria stood up, her hands clenched into fists. "You self-righteous bastard. You think you're so much better than me. You destroyed everything I worked for, everything I built. And for what? Some moral victory for justice. Justice." Victoria's laugh was wild, unhinged. "This isn't justice. This is revenge, and you enjoyed every minute of it." Marcus felt the words hit home because part of him knew she was right. He had enjoyed watching her squirm, had felt satisfaction in her public humiliation. The righteous anger that had driven him 6 months ago was tainted now with the knowledge that he'd chosen cruelty over mercy. "Maybe I did," he admitted. "Maybe I wanted you to hurt the way you made me hurt. Well, congratulations. Mission accomplished." Victoria's voice broke. "I'm losing my house next week. My credit's destroyed. I can't get a job because every time someone Googles my name, they find stories about what a heartless bitch I am. You want to know what justice looks like? I'm living in my car." The weight of her words settled between them like a physical thing. Marcus had known she was struggling the town gossip. Mill had been full of stories about Victoria's financial troubles, but he hadn't understood the full scope of her fall. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. "No, you're not. You're exactly where you wanted me to be." "That's not true, isn't it?" Victoria's eyes blazed with desperate fury. "You had your revenge, Marcus. You got to play the grieving hero, while I became the villain in everyone's story. But here's the thing about revenge. Doesn't bring back the dead. Your father is still gone, and nothing you did to me changed that." Marcus felt the truth of her words like a punch to the gut. 6 months of weekly visits to his father's grave, and he was no closer to peace than he'd been the day he'd scattered those ashes. The satisfaction of his victory had curdled into something ugly, leaving him feeling emptier than before. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "I want you to look me in the eyes and tell me you're satisfied. Tell me that destroying my life made your grief easier to bear." Marcus looked at her and saw not the arrogant city woman who'd tried to extort him, but a broken human being whose worst moment had been broadcast to the world. Her cruelty had been real, but so was her suffering now. "No," he said quietly. "It didn't." Victoria's anger deflated like a punctured balloon. Then what was the point? "I don't know anymore." They stood in silence for a moment, two people, wounded by their own choices. The mountain loomed above them, indifferent to human pain and human folly. "The foreclosures next Friday," Victoria said, finally. "Banks selling everything, the house, the furniture, even my car. Guess they figure a BMW will help offset some of the loss. Where will you go? Somewhere no one knows my name." Somewhere I can start over without carrying the weight of being that woman from the internet. Marcus thought about his father's voice, the lessons about second chances and forgiveness that had seemed so clear 6 months ago. The cemetery fund you donated to used it to build a new memorial garden. Your name's on the plaque. Victoria's laugh was hollow. Great. So future generations can remember me as the woman who had to be shamed into doing the right thing, or as someone who ultimately chose to honor the dead instead of profiting from them. Pretty words, Marcus, but we both know which version of the story people will remember. A car approached from down the mountain, a beat-up Honda with Pennsylvania plates. It stopped near Victoria's BMW, and a middle-aged man got out. He had the weathered look of someone who'd spent his life working with his hands. "You, Victoria Hartwell?" he asked. Victoria tensed. "Depends who's asking." The man extended his hand. "Name's Tom Morrison. I saw your story on the news a few months back." Victoria didn't take his hand. "Great. Another fan come to tell me what a terrible person I am. Actually, I wanted to thank you." Both Marcus and Victoria stared at him. "Thank me?" "My dad died last year. Cancer. Near the end, he wanted to be buried in the old family plot up in coal country, but the new landowner wanted $10,000 to let us through. I saw what happened to you, and I realized I didn't want to be that kind of person, so I let the family bury him for free." Victoria's face went pale. "You came all the way here to tell me that. Figured you should know that sometimes even our worst moments can teach people something valuable." Tom got back in his car. "Take care of yourself, ma'am." As his Honda disappeared down the mountain road, Victoria and Marcus stood in stunned silence. The weight of unintended consequences hung between them. How one person's public shaming had rippled outward, creating unexpected moments of grace. "I never thought, ... double quotes Victoria started, then stopped. Neither did I." Victoria walked to her BMW and opened the door, then paused. "The $50,000 I donated it cleaned out my savings. Probably what started the whole financial collapse." "I didn't know." "Of course you didn't. You were too busy being righteous to think about the consequences." She got into the car, then rolled down the window. "But maybe that man's father got a proper burial because of it. Maybe that's worth something." As Victoria drove away, Marcus realized this would probably be the last time he saw her. She'd disappear into anonymity, carrying the weight of her public humiliation while trying to rebuild a life from the ashes of her old one. He walked back to his truck, his father's voice echoing in his memory. "Son, the measure of a man isn't in how hard he can hit, but in how he treats people when he has the power to hurt them." Marcus had failed that test. He'd chosen vengeance over mercy, public humiliation over private justice. The fact that some good had come from it, Tom Morrison's act of kindness, the memorial garden, even Victoria's eventual contrition, didn't erase the cruelty of his methods. 6 months later, Marcus received a letter with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping from a small town in Oregon showing the dedication of a new community center. The article mentioned a significant anonymous donation from someone who wanted to honor the memory of families who'd lost access to burial grounds. At the bottom of the clipping, in careful handwriting, were just 3 words: "Thank you." Marcus folded the letter and placed it in his father's old desk. Next to the easement documents that had started everything, outside, the mountain stood eternal and indifferent. He'd gotten his revenge, but the victory had cost them both more than either had imagined. In the end, the mountain had taught them the same harsh lesson, that the people we become in our worst moments are just as real as the people we aspire to be in our best ones. The trail to the summit